Is it on? Oh, yeah. So good morning and welcome. Is there anyone here for the first time? No? Okay, very good. Well, again, welcome to all of you here this morning. My name is Lama Tom Broadwater. And what I thought we would do is begin with the Mahamudra lineage prayer. And it's on page 3. Okay, let's begin. Great Vajradhara, Tilopa, Naropa, and Marpa Milarepa, Lord of Dharma Gampopa, to knower of the 3 times omniscient Karmapa, lineage holders of the 4 great and 8 lesser schools, Drikun, Taklun, Salpa, Glorious Drupa, and others, you who have mastered the profound path of Mahamudra, the Dakpo Kaju, unrivaled protectors of sentient beings, I pray to you, Kaju Lamas. Grant your blessing that I may follow your tradition and example. As is taught, detachment is the foot of meditation. Attachment to food and wealth disappears. To the meditator who gives up the ties to this life, grant your blessing that attachment to ownership and honor cease. As is taught, devotion is the head of meditation. The Lama opens the door to the profound oral teachings. To the meditator who always turns to him or her, grant your blessing that uncontrived devotion be born within. As is taught, unwavering attention is the body of meditation. Whatever arises is a fresh nature of thought. To the meditator who rests there in naturalness, grant your blessing that meditation be free from intellectualization. As is taught, the essence of thought is Dharmakaya. They are nothing whatsoever, and yet they arise. To the meditator who reflects upon the unobstructed play of the mind, grant your blessing that the inseparability of samsara and nirvana be realized. Through all of my births, may I not be separated from the perfect Lama and enjoy the glory of the Dharma. May I completely accomplish the qualities of the path and stages and quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. We have a full house here today. It's great. Good to see you all. So again, my name is Lama Tom Broadwater. I've been associated with this center for the past almost 25 years. So today we're going to talk about what's called the 4 thoughts that lead us to the Dharma. Has anyone heard of those? Yeah. You may have heard them many times. In fact, if you practice Nundro, you probably, in the lifetime of your practice, will say these 4 thoughts over thousands of times. Tralek Rinpoche said of these thoughts, they're good when we begin practice, they're good in the middle of practice, and as we advance, they are just as valuable. So there's never a time we can't use these 4 thoughts to help us. And they help us wherever we are on the spiritual path, whether at the beginning or you're at a stage much advanced. The 4 thoughts are simple facts. They are facts that any religion or any spiritual path could recognize and recognize the truth of them. And the other thing I would say about them, we all recognize these facts at some level of awareness all the time. But for a lot of reasons, we ignore them. We ignore them in our daily lives. But the 4 thoughts are here to remind us of what is truly and ultimately most important. Most important in terms of the conduct of our own lives. It's said that when we contemplate these facts, our thoughts resolve into an urgent need to follow a spiritual path. The fact is that because we do forget these simple facts, sadly, we squander our lives on meaningless, superficial activities. I'm talking about myself too, so don't worry. I'm not here preaching, I'm here teaching, and part of teaching is recognizing what I'm saying as being part of what I need to do. But it is because we don't realize and put into practice these thoughts in our daily lives, you and I squander so much of our lives. And our lives in meaningless activity. I don't have to remind you of all the distractions you can get involved in. They're endless. They're mind-numbing entertainments. And we have constant access to a repetitive 24-hour news cycle. You all know that, right? This is not something new to you. And of course, we have our devices. Oh, I left mine downstairs. But we all have our devices and waste a lot of time there. I mean, wow, how much time we waste. So each of us have our own favorite distractions, right? Meaningless activity that diminishes our intelligence. And in that fog of distraction, our spiritual aspirations are barely perceptible. So our spiritual masters have given us these 4 thoughts to contemplate and to avoid a meaningless life. And by contemplating these thoughts, we can start to carve out a spiritual life of meaning. So what's the real cause? What's the real cause for our lack of engagement in a meaningful life? Or if we have begun that spiritual practice, that life of meaningful spiritual practice, we sometimes lose heart or practice half-heartedly. Why is that? Why does that happen? We have the best intentions and then hit upon the rock of our own laziness or what have you, whatever obstacle may come up. Why does that happen? Oh, I don't have the answer, but Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche does. He was a teacher, and he was the teacher that was the founder of this center. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that all I repeat, all of our mundane work and activities are based upon a misapprehension, a mistaken belief that the world and all the things of this world are permanent and therefore meaningful. That's the end of that quote. So because of this misapprehension, we grasp in a futile and willful way to maintain that mistaken belief, despite the truth. The truth is, things are not permanent. But we go around as if they were. And so, as a result, everything we do based upon this grasping and mistaken belief is wrong. So one of the most basic ways we reverse this meaningless trajectory of our lives and turn our minds to virtue is a contemplation of those four thoughts. Before I go into the actual four thoughts, I want to tell you that one of the best ways to approach all spiritual practice, and this in particular, is the way that Traleg Rinpoche taught. He's another great teacher, passed away about 10 years ago, something like that. And what he said was that before we consider any other thing, it is important to consider this one thing. And he called it devotion. So he said that when we approach any practice, we should start with devotion. Now, generally, we have an idea of what devotion means, but he had a particular translation of the word mugu, which is, I'm not a scholar of Tibetan, but I do know that word, mugu, which means devotion. But he translated it into English in a different way. And he said in his book, The Practice of Lojong, he said that mugu can be translated as interested humility. So anytime we are approaching practice or teaching, we approach it with interested humility. And that interested humility, he said, was far, far more important than undisciplined bursts of enthusiasm. So, what does that mean? Interest means I'm curious. What's this all about? How does this apply? What does it mean to me? If you want to take full advantage of a teaching, be curious. Ask questions. At the end, hopefully we'll have time for questions. Be curious. And the other quality to have anytime you're practicing or approaching practice or teaching is humility. One of the greatest obstacles to our growth in spirituality is our pride. It's an obstacle. It's approaching things like, well, I already know that, or I've heard that before. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing really new under the sun. If that's the approach we take, we're like, as they say, a pot turned upside down that cannot be a proper vessel to be filled with anything. So Nagarjuna said it another way. He said this in his 400 stanzas. He said, an unprejudiced, meaning unbiased, just coming fresh to a teaching, intelligent, curious, an interested listener is a worthy vessel to receive the blessings from a teaching or from a practice. If we want the four thoughts to be powerful and effective in our lives, we should have an attitude of interested humility. Even if we've heard the thoughts 1,000 times, we approach them with curiosity and humility. These thoughts that I'm going to talk about today deepen our resolve to begin or enliven our practice, depending on where you are. And they're around 4 basic ideas. First, our precious human existence. So we think about that. We think about death and impermanence. That's the second. The third is karma, the results of our actions. Actions, karma is like the shadow that follows us everywhere. And finally, the fourth thought we're going to consider is the dissatisfactory nature of samsara, of our existence currently. You can go to lamakathy.com and her PDF, one of her PDF files, describe exactly how you can practice these 4 thoughts, but I'll give them to you right now just as a refresher. So we take each thought, each one of those thoughts, and we think about that thought. We run it over in our minds. What's that thought saying? What's that thought mean? What do the words mean? And then we say, are they true? And more importantly, are they true for me? And then, if it's true for you, let it strike your heart. Let it move you. And once you've reached the point where the thought has moved you, you make a suitable resolution and see the urgency of that thought in your life, and the urgency to practice a meaningful life. There's different ways to approach these thoughts. One way is to take 1 thought a day. Another is to, in a practice session, do all 4. You might do 1 a week. It's really up to you as to how you want to practice them. Of course, if you have taken refuge, you would begin with refuge and end in dedication. Another thought to keep in mind here, the 4 thoughts are meditation. They're not they are a contemplation, not a meditation. And meditation, basically, what do? We put our awareness on the object of our meditation, which may be our breath, it may be an object, whatever. And when our mind strays, we come back to it. Contemplation is different in that we actually use thought. We use a thought, and we roll it over in our mind. But like meditation, when our mind strays from that thought, we come back to the consideration of that thought. So we're actually analyzing, thinking about, discerning what the 4 thoughts mean to us. So I think now we're ready for the first thought. And it's about our precious human birth. These are said different ways in different texts. I use one text. You may find it slightly different in another. But it is all about our precious human birth. So it begins, this precious human birth, its vitality, and all of its freedoms and resources so favorable to the practice of Dharma is so hard to obtain and easily lost. So you take that thought, you think about it, how my life is precious, what resources I have, what kind of freedoms I have to practice. You think about that. And then you say, is that true? Is it true for me? And what should I resolve as a result? So really the most precious resource we have is our own body. Our bodies provide the basis for enlightenment. Even from a strictly biological sense, our bodies are really amazing. So the texts speak of the freedoms and resources we have at our disposal. Often, as we will find out, we take these resources and freedoms for granted. And in that state of ingratitude, we become occupied with the minor irritations that life presents us. We just forget how fortunate we are to have the resources we have. It's really sad. It's really sad that we don't appreciate them. So as Tralik Rinpoche says, and I'm going to refer to him a number of times, he says, by appreciating our precious human body, we transform it into a spiritual vehicle of meaning and joy. In another way, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche says, you and I have all the resources, all the freedoms we need to practice. The texts speak of 8 freedoms and 10 resources. I won't go into all of them. If you're interested at the end of this talk and you want to ask about them, I will. But right now, just say that the resources we have, first of all, we live in what's called the human realm. In no other, in Buddhist cosmology, there are 6 realms, and this is the only realm that we can gain enlightenment. So we're lucky in that respect. We're fortunate in that respect. In this realm, the Buddha has appeared. We're lucky for that. We're fortunate in that. And you and I have enough intelligence, although sometimes I question myself. You and I have enough intelligence to understand the teachings. And once hearing them, we're not adverse to learning. The fact you're all here says you have an affinity for teaching of the Dharma, the teaching of the truth. That in itself shows you're not adverse. So you're fortunate in that respect. And you're also fortunate in that we are in a place where we can practice. We have the freedom of religion to practice. And finally, and perhaps the most important thing is, you and I have teachers from the lineage who, out of the kindness of their hearts and their compassion for us, are willing to teach. So we have all those resources at our disposal. So contemplating the preciousness of our life. Another way to look at it, if we look around this world, there's probably a lot more insects than there are human beings. So in that respect, we can say life is precious. So, and another thing is just waking up in the morning. Do you ever say, oh my gosh, I'm alive? There's something sort of miraculous about that. That becomes more so as you get old. But no matter how old you are, there are times when you wake up and you say, oh my, this is pretty cool to be alive. So the next step is to be alive, to practice, to make meaning out of this life through our spiritual practice. That's the first thought. The second thought is about death and impermanence. And it goes like this. The world and all of its inhabitants are all impermanent. There's nothing you see or experience that is permanent. The life and the vitality of beings is like a water bubble. It arises and it's gone. Again, from the vantage point of my age, I really understand that. Many of you, much younger than me, think, I've got all the time in the world. Take it from me. You don't. Life, as the second thought says, is like a water bubble. It's like a bubble off a mountain stream. There it is, and there it's not. The thought goes on to say, when I die, I'll become a corpse. At that time, only the Dharma, here meaning the truth of our practice, the virtue of our practice, will be of benefit to us. Therefore, here's the resolution. So we've taken that thought, we've figured out what the words mean. We say, is it true? Is it true for me? And then, what's my resolution? I resolve to practice. I resolve to develop my spiritual life. And I'm going to do it with some diligence because I don't have all the time in the world. Going back to Tralek Rinpoche, he says, we cannot keep on postponing spiritual practice, nor can we practice in a half-hearted manner that lacks seriousness. We so often immerse ourselves in trivial pursuits. Anyone want to raise their hand that doesn't? No, don't do that. We all do. And in doing that, we're refusing to consider the impermanent and fragile nature of all of our lives. He further writes, we do not prioritize activities in our life, therefore ignoring what can transform our misery and our unhappiness. We don't prioritize. I tell this story often. A couple of years back, I worked with another student here in a prison. And we worked with a fellow on death row. He basically, because of the conditions, sat in his cell 24 hours a day. We gave him an assignment one time to do. We only saw him once a month. So we came back the next month. And we said, were you able to do the practice? He said, didn't have time. We do not prioritize our activities in our life, ignoring what can transform our misery and unhappiness. What we do by the way, he did have a TV that he could see through and he watched all day. He learned, but it took him some time. And we all can learn. But instead, you and I energetically pursue the deluded seductions that momentarily comfort us. But in every case, ultimately disappoint us. We all recognize at some level we're going to die, right? I mean, nobody here thinks they're going to live forever. And I can tell you, in this room, no one's going to get out of here eventually alive. We're all going to die. We all know that. What we don't consider is that we could die in the very next moment. Some of you may have chronic conditions, and that may allow you to see a little bit more the fragility of your own lives. But that's something we ignore, how fragile this life is. Precariously fragile. Things can be going so well, so great, and on a dime change. I'm sure some of you have had that happen. Everything looks rosy and great, and boom, something happens and makes you realize, This is all very fragile. We cannot depend, we talked about all the favorable conditions we have right now. We cannot depend that into an indefinite future, those conditions will continue. But an even greater insight is that all things are impermanent and subject to instantaneous change. Padampa Sanjay, he's a great teacher, and he was begging the people in his community to understand the nature of life and how important it is to practice. He said, Padampa Sanjay said, and he warning the people of his village was called Tangri. He said, life is ephemeral like dew on the grass. We've all seen dew on the grass. Sun comes up, boom, it's gone. Our lives are like that. So he said, people of Tangri do not yield to laziness. So the second thought instructs us not only the Dharma will benefit us, that only the Dharma will benefit us at death. When we die, the only thing we take with us is our karma. And that, as I said before, that karma will follow us like a shadow. So, as a result of that contemplation, we decide we're going to practice a little bit more diligently. So now let's look at the third thought. The third thought is karma and its results. And it says, at the time of death, we will have no freedom. You can't bargain at the time of death. If it comes, it's there. There's nothing you can do about it. You have no freedom. And this thought goes further and it says, actions are those things we have done. Those actions take their course. Since I create my own karma, I must abandon all wrongdoing. And so I resolve to pass my time in continuous virtue. And here's the someone said gobsmacker. Here's the big point. Thinking like this, each day I resolve to scrutinize my own being. I was told I did gobsmacking this morning. This is a gobsmacker thought. Every once in a while, take a look at your mind. What are you doing with it? As Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche says, after death, we will be blown about by the winds of karma, like leaves blown about by the wind. Further, he said, if I have accumulated virtuous action, and if we have some reason to want to be born in a lower realm, we cannot be born there. On the other hand, if I've committed or accumulated bad karma, even if I wish to have a fortunate rebirth, I will not. So the deciding factor here is not what we want, but what we've done. Then the text says, I will abandon wrongdoing. What's that mean? Abandoning wrongdoing is, first of all, admitting it. You know, we said earlier, pride was one of the biggest obstacles to a spiritual path. It takes some humility to admit our defects and our faults. So first we admit them. The word, and I'm no Tibetan scholar, but the word for confession in Tibetan means like you have this big sack of grain and at the bottom you slit it open and you just let it all fall out. So it's like you just admit it. Hey, I've done lots of stuff I shouldn't have done, and you just let it come out. That's admitting it. That's confessing it. And then what you have to do is renounce it as best you can, which means to separate yourself from that wrongdoing. You are not the worst act you've ever committed. You separate yourself. You renounce it. And resolve that from this time on, never to perform that act again. I once spoke to Khenpo Rinpoche, and I said, Rinpoche, to say I'll never do it's really hard. I said, could I just say I won't do it in the next hour? He said, sure, that's a start. And then, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what they say. Make the commitment for a period of time. I won't do that for the next hour. So you do the best you can in terms of confession. And then it says, as I just said, scrutinize your being every day. We look mindfully at what we're doing. It's really a good practice to every day sort of stop and say, where is my mind right now? Is it involved in overwhelming emotion? Is it in the process of afflictive emotion? What have I done today? Am I being lazy? Am I being too uptight? It's really a good idea once in a while to stop and look at your mind. The point being, you have to be mindful of that, though. You have to remember. Some people actually have an alarm on their watch that goes off. Oh, I'm supposed to look at my mind right now. Good practice. Rinpoche, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, if we do that kind of practice, eventually you're going to become your own teacher, because you're going to start looking and say, oh, this is what I'm doing. So you and I can be our own teacher by just doing that one practice. Now let's go to the fourth thought. Samsara and its unsatisfactoriness. And it says, all the places, companions, pleasures, and possessions continually torment me with the three sufferings. We'll talk about that in a minute. Those companions, those possessions, those pleasures are like a feast given to us by an executioner to a prisoner before their execution. I don't know how you would enjoy your last meal. But this thought is telling us all pleasures are like that. They're sort of empty. And so it says if we contemplate that thought, we are drawn to the resolution that I will eradicate grasping and accomplish awakening with diligence. All these things that I've just mentioned, companions, the places we live, our possessions, they're absolutely no use to us at the time of death. I've been involved in a project, I'm not now, but I was involved in a project called No One Should Die Alone. Basically, the idea was that there are people that are homeless or alienated from their families that are in the hospital dying, and they are comforted by a person next to them. And that's what we did. But in a sense, that's not really, we don't accompany a person beyond death. So we are a companion up to the point of death. We take nothing with us at death other than our deeds. we do die alone. So maybe right now it's the best time to begin lessening the allure of all things mundane. Certainly, and this is Tralai Rinpoche says, he said, at death we will need more than worldly achievements to complete and perfect our lives. Now, of course, we got to satisfy pressing, basic, and temporary emotional and physical needs. We got to do that, right? But keep in mind that in doing so, we do not satisfy the more profound need to liberate ourselves and others from suffering. If we can't make that distinction between what is temporary need and profound spiritual yearning, we will be in an endless search for satisfactions that are intrinsically incapable of producing happiness and fulfillment. And this is why we wander endlessly from one diversion to another. Again, Tralai Rinpoche says, we fulfill our temporal needs through temporary measures, and we fulfill our spiritual goals through spiritual means. But you and I are like people addicted to drugs and alcohol. We have to keep increasing the amount of the substance we consume, whatever that thing might be. And we have to consume more to reach the same satisfaction as we previously had. So a thing can begin as pleasure, as a source of pleasure, and a reason for pleasure. But that same thing can quickly become a source of pain and more suffering. It's futile. The fact is, it's futile to try to gain what we want from things that can never give it to us. So everything that we experience causes us pain. And the lineage masters tell us there's 3 reasons for that, and it involves change and suffering. There are 3 kinds of suffering. There's called the suffering of suffering. That's just pain. We all experience that. And even if you and I manage never to even have to use a Band-Aid in our lifetime, we still have to experience the pain of death. So, the suffering of suffering. There's also, there's emotional pain. We get our feelings hurt, we worry about the future, we ruminate about our troubles. So we can experience straight suffering anytime. And we experience that anytime where we're in a situation we'd rather not be. Ever been there? Of course, we all have. So, and the second kind of suffering is the suffering of change. It arises from our inability to accept impermanence. That's not true. We do know that. We forget it. That's the problem. We just have that tendency to forget that everything is impermanent. So if the suffering of suffering describes an experience that we wish were over, the suffering of change is just the opposite. We want it never to stop. We don't want change, and change occurs. Finally, there's what's called the suffering of existence. It's also called all-pervasive suffering. And that's basically the suffering we experience because of our ignorance of not knowing the way things really operate, the way things really are. It's a mistaken view, and it's referred to as our ignorance. And this confusion, this ignorance, perpetuates this endless cycle of seeking pleasure outside of what can really give us pleasure and happiness. We suffer in part because we don't realize the true cause of our suffering. We continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, attempting to avoid what causes pain while seeking what is pleasurable. But if our being okay with the world is dependent upon the world around us being just so, just the way we want it, we're all doomed. Why? Because all things change. Even if we get exactly what we want, we can't take it with us when we die. Elon Musk will not take his billions of dollars with him. At the doorstep of death, he will leave it there, just like you and me. Whatever we've accumulated, we drop at the doorstep of death. So our lives are like this. Someone gives us an incredible meal to eat, and after it says, now I'm going to kill you. That's the way it is. It's like that. That's our situation. So, what do? Part of it is we have to let go. Let go of our grasping based upon wanting things to be permanent, unchangeable, substantial, and real. We have to let go of that. But you would misunderstand, now I'm going to come to the punchline here. You would misunderstand all of this if you think these contemplations, that their purpose is to make you have less zest for life. In fact, the people that I see as most joyous are the ones that are least grasping. My teacher, he lived very humbly in a one-room place. He could have had a palace. He had very few possessions. But he was, in my estimation, the happiest person I ever met. Why? Because he knew things as they really are, and he didn't try to hold on. These contemplations are meant to teach us to live a meaningful life, a purposeful life. And they're meant to give us a sober, mature, realistic view of our situation. The facts, simply the facts. It's like this. Do you want to live a life without regret? Do you want to live a life? Like Rinpoche said, again, I'm going back to him, a regretful life has waste written all over it. A fully lived life carries all the marks of contentment. I think we all would like, at the end of our lives, to feel, I've lived a meaningful life. I'm content. I'm ready to let go. That won't happen if you haven't practiced up to that point. Having witnessed death with many of the folks in hospice, you can tell the folks that have lived a meaningful life and those that are grasping, holding on, and fearful. And so we have a choice. How do we want to live our life? And that will determine how we will die. So to live a life without regret, we discern the difference between what's essential and what's superficial. In that process, we overcome the misapprehension that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche talked about that I said in the beginning of this talk. Recall all of our mundane work and activities are based on misapprehension, a mistaken belief that the world and the things of this world are permanent and therefore meaningful. Through that recollection, we loosen our grasping. We discern what is temporary. We discern what is temporary need and what's our deepest spiritual aspirations. And then we must conduct ourselves accordingly. So, anybody curious, have questions or comments or thoughts? Well, what we can do, we'll take 5 minutes and we can sit and meditate. What do you say to that? Sound okay? So look at your mind right now. Are you relaxed or are you tense? Make the adjustment in your body and in your mind to be relaxed. Relaxed but aware. Not thinking about yesterday, not worrying about tomorrow. Not thinking about the present, just being. This is shamatha, resting the mind in naked silence. So as we always do, we dedicate the merit of our being here this morning. Again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the fact that you listened. And I didn't see anyone fall asleep, so that's a good sign, maybe. So the dedication prayer is on page 30. We'll say this in English. Through this merit, may all beings gather the accumulation of merit and awareness. May they attain the two supreme kayas arising from merit and awareness. May precious bodhicitta arise within those where it has not arisen. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but ever grow and flourish. By this merit, may all attain admissions. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from this ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path, I completely dedicate all this merit. Thank you all, and have a great week.